So if there was ever any early criticism of Nolathane products, it was simply they were maybe just a little bit too hard and harsh. That's in the early days. That's understandable because they were actually derived out of a motorsport application where you need the material to be hard and harsh. But as time has moved on, these guys have managed to engineer their products down to, when installed in the car, to levels like rubber, remembering that manufacturers do use rubber in their cars as standard because they're nice and plush. And these guys have managed to achieve that over time, but without compromising the integrity, in fact, advancing the integrity of the material. So when we talk about how hard and how soft some of these products are, so I've got a couple of little samples here. What we do is use a thing called a durometer. We use it in motorsport to measure the hardness and softness of tyres. And if we go back to, say, back when these guys started out, the hardness was there we go, it was a 94. Now I can tell you, that's quite hard to bend. Now, if I stick my durometer on there, you'll see I will get 75. And how soft is that? Well, you can see there, pretty soft. Now, when we look at it over on our meter over here, I've put together a bit of a gauge. So back in the day, hard 94, motorsport application, perfect. Industrial, heavy-duty industrial applications, now only makes up 1% of the Nolathane range. Medium, which is now sort of 20 years ago that came on board and is still used in some really heavy-duty applications. But today, soft, at that 75 as we saw. And I know you're going to ask the very obvious question, of which I did originally do, how the hell do you do that and continue to make it stronger? Well, let's have a look at that. So if you could imagine a whole bunch of people standing around in a laboratory in white coats, pouring different chemicals into flasks and bubbles coming off it, that's pretty well what happens here as they try and up the ante with the engineering of their products. So that's how they've been able to not only get them softer, but stronger. The ongoing development at Nolathane is one thing I love about this company. I always have. They remind me of a race team, actually. They're always trying to make the lap time better. Now, when we apply that specifically to the formulation that is current, what have they done? Well, I can tell you, they've upped the numbers on the load bearing. That's the capability for the Nolathane product to take the load. And often that's a compression type load. So when you do that, you also need to think about tensile strength. They've upped the ante on that as well. In many applications in a car, not only is the Nolathane product under compression, it's trying to tear itself apart. That's the tensile strength that's required. Then, of course, you need the appropriate amount of flexibility, and with flexibility, you also need memory. So when something twists and contorts in situ, it also needs to be able to go back into its original place. Abrasion resistance. Well, you could only imagine the torture that some of these components get in their application on a road car. And I can tell you, and I'll show you, they've come up with some very clever ways of dealing with abrasion. And of course, something we don't think of a lot, which is chemical resistance. In the environment that these applications are in on your car, they can be around sometimes oil and lubricants, road grime, even exhaust gas, which will break them down over time. Rubber is very susceptible to it, these guys aren't. So let's have a look now, when you combine softer, stronger, some of these elements, how we end up with smarter products. So let me tell you what I'm specifically talking about when I say smarter components. I mean, I think this is pretty cool because if you go back to what we all know as a suspension bushing, pretty plain, pretty gnarly, doesn't do anything magic, things have come a long way. And what these guys have done for me is very, very cool, very clever. So let's start with a few of the features. One of the things I really like, in a lot of the products they do, you'll see this type of slot in here, which is like a dampener, if you like. And that's a really clever application of a simple design because in some applications you might need a tougher material. In doing so, it can transfer some of the noise and harshness from the road up into the cockpit. By having dampening slots, you can have or optimise the material you want to use, but you don't transfer the noise or the harshness up into the cockpit. Another way of doing this again is very clever. You couldn't do this with rubber, I believe, but with the Nolathane material you can. So they can, again, optimise the material, but by making the shape like that versus that, again, we don't have a full contact with the housing that might slip into. Therefore, we don't transfer the noise or the harshness up through the suspension and into the cockpit. Very clever, and here we see the same idea in a different application. Again, optimising the material, but a different design, so again, we're not making full contact and allowing some dampening again in a different way there. Now this moves me on to another area that I think is fantastic, which we'll call lubrication management. Again, a bush is not a bush anymore. So one of the really key features that's happened with the Nolathane product, I don't know if you can see right inside there, there's a knurling that they put in there. So when you put lubricant in there, as you should, the lubricant can sit within that knurling and maintain lubrication of very, very important products. And if we look at that, you know, here's another little shackle type bush, very clever again, got the knurling on the inside, got these slots on the outside, because you know when you put one of these into a shackle, sometimes, because the shackle isn't particularly good quality, different sizings, those slots there mean that that'll fit a whole range of applications. Another really cool thing on the outside here, look at that, slots in here, so when you can wipe your grease around there, it'll handle it, stay in there and keep that well maintained. For really severe applications such as your anti-roll bar or sway bar as we call it, PTFE, look at that. Inside that bushing, Nolathane bushing, is a PTFE, low friction surface. So if you look here, good example, that'd be around that way, that'll be bolted on your car, that'd be an anti-roll bar going across your car. So we need that really, really tight. Any play in that is really bad news. Now, all of this, what I like, is Nolathane have made the application of this really easy by keeping the installer in mind. As you can see here, they've gone and made a range of high quality components with all this clever stuff pre-fitted into the components. Nolathane, very clever, very cool.